Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and tonight on Living Mythology, I'm proud to bring you Brian's Drive-In Theater with Brian Walker. Greetings and welcome, Brian. How are you?
I'm well tonight, Hercules. How are you this evening?
I'm doing fantastic and looking forward to today's show.
Great, me too. Believe it or not, I always prepare for these. I never wing it. I know it probably sounds like I do, but I actually do my homework. And I did so much homework for tonight's topic that I think we'll be able to extend this into at least another show. And it's a topic that I'm really excited about. What I wanted to talk about tonight is the carnival or the theme setting, or the I'm sorry, the fair setting that you find in a lot of horror films, especially ones from, let's say, the 60s through the 80s. Did you ever go to Coney Island when you were a kid, or did you ever?
Yes, I actually, when I had my television show, we were going to film in Coney Island.
Oh,
And
really?
yes, and we did a few shows, and part of the opening for the show, which is still on YouTube, I believe, took place in Coney Island. And I went and talked to them, and I asked them to film there. And they said, well, there are fees and all of this type of stuff. They mentioned that a motion picture company paid them $10,000 a day. And I said, well, I'm not a motion picture company. I'm Thor the Barbarian. And they and they said, and we're Coney Island. Of course you can film here. So
Well, I cannot remember the name, and I'll talk about it during the next show. But I stumbled upon a horror film that was actually shot at Disney World, but it was shot guerrilla style. They shot the movie without telling anybody at Disney World what they were doing. And I haven't seen it yet. So I'm going to try to watch it. And I can't remember the title. But I'm going to try to watch it before the next time we meet so I can spew on about it. But yeah, that's the topic that I wanted to talk about. And like I said, there's so much content and great movies to talk about, quite honestly. Things that we don't ordinarily talk about. So I thought that would be kind of nice to talk about some, different fresh movies.
that sounds incredibly awesome.
Hopefully it will be. And and I want to extend this to circus and sideshow too, for a very important reason. The local, I mean, well, the real tie-in for me is that for close to 20 years, during like a 10-day span in August, every day, I was responsible for my units, and I worked and still work at a very large university in Morgantown, West Virginia University, and I was responsible for creating and staffing our display at the state fair. I worked for the Division of Student Life, and we handled a lot of non-academic issues that students have. It could be anything from legal issues. We had attorneys to help students. I helped them with housing very often, as a matter of fact, and I also helped students who were I had a large group of at-risk students under me that I was responsible for. And when I mean large, I mean like anywhere from 600 to 1,000 a year.
Wow.
Yeah, it's impossible. But you're nice to, I don't have to do that. I retired from that a year ago, so I don't have to do that anymore. But anyway, during all the chaos of the semester starting, and sometimes I'd be in the classroom too, I also had to be 3 hours away at the state fair. It was a lot of fun. Usually, here's what I wound up doing. After a while, I couldn't get anybody to volunteer for it. Nobody would do it. So I would just pack Greg up, even though he wasn't on payroll. I would just say, Greg, get in the car, go to Lewisburg, and he would staff he would put everything together, our displays and such, and then staff it every day. And that's 8 hours a day too.
Wow.
Uh, and we used to have a lot of giveaways, and therefore we had a lot of traffic by the table. So it was a lot of interaction. After a while, I didn't have budget for giveaways anymore, sadly. But every day that Greg and I would work, and we did this for years. Okay, but every day that he and I would work, we would walk the midway before sort of our shift began, before our building opened. And it was just fascinating to walk the midway and see some faint remnants of what we remember from carnival midways, let's say when we were kids, or what you used to see in films, back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. The big painted, displays with, let's say, a snake woman, or a
Hmm.
three-headed baby or something like that. They still haven't used some of those. Now they don't have like the babies in jars of formaldehyde or anything like that. Not that I saw.
Here they
I hope.
did when Athena and I were growing up, and here's one
Well,
place we passed
me
through a lot.
too.
They were there.
Yeah, one of my earlier memories, just being alone with my dad, was I don't. We were at some carnival somewhere, and my mother wouldn't do it, but my dad took me in to see the sideshows, and I can still remember how gross it was, quite honestly. Excuse me. But that's kind of my tie-in for tonight. Now I worked. I had to spend a week and a half at our state fair, which was actually in pretty good shape. I mean, decent grounds, and nice place to be. Um, but sorry, hold on for a minute, Hercules. I'm
Sure.
having some. I'm sorry. I'm back. Anyway, that was sort of my tie-in for it, because as we would walk around the midway, and this was fairly well sanitized, it was clean and such. Although some of the carnies were they're sort of the scariest thing on the midway, if you ask me, or they can be anyway. But one year when we were walking the midway, I thought, gosh, this is a fantastic place for a horror movie, especially at night. Not so much during the day, but at night. I mean, you've got all of these, the rides and places to hide and such. It really makes for a good and interesting topic, for a setting, that is, for a film. And I can remember going to carnivals when I was a kid. I remember in Bay City on one side of the Saginaw River. At that time, that was sort of the Bay County Fairgrounds, and they would have all kinds of amusement park rides, and they were just trucked in, sitting in mud, pretty much. It's some 2x4s and some cinder blocks weighing them down. And back then we didn't really consider safety all that much.
Mhm.
You knew that OSHA wasn't going to be around to see what the work conditions are, so, so nobody else was inspecting this stuff either back in the day.
Back in the
And I,
day, yeah.
and I can remember being, a little creeped. I mean, I loved going to carnivals, but I can remember being a little creeped out by maybe some of the carnies, and maybe the condition of some of the rides. Yeah, certainly. And the first movie I wanted to talk about, actually, is a very good British film. One of the better British horror films from the 1960s, and that is Circus of Horrors, with Anton Differing. Yvonne Romaine, one of my favorite British actresses from the 60s, is in this film, in a smaller role. She doesn't have a big role, but she's a pretty showy role. And Donald Pleasance from every horror movie that you can remember in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So, but here, this movie came out in 1960, and he's a relatively young man. We always think of him as being, 60 whatever years old, because of his role as Dr. Loomis in, the Halloween franchise. But in this one, he has a really sympathetic role, um, and I mean, he was a very good actor. He was classically trained, very good at what he did, but he kind of found his niche in horror films. Maybe not classically trained, but he was a sturdy enough actor to be able to be able to handle drama, and he has a role in Circus of Horrors where he actually gets to show off his chops, and he's very good. Um, well, and his daughter, Angela Pleasance, is also an actress. She's in her 80s now, but she did some horror films in the 70s, and she did a film with him as his daughter, interestingly enough. It's in one of those Amicus vignette horror films, and I can't remember the name of it right off the top of my head because I'm old and my gray matter is starting to seize up. Um, but the interesting thing about Circus of Horrors is that it involves a plastic surgeon who can seemingly work miracles, but disguises himself with the Circus of Horrors. And it's a really fun movie to watch. I highly recommend it. As a matter of fact, a lot of fun and a quality film too. Shot very well. British films are never, they're rarely poorly produced. They're often dull and maybe not so well written. But they're never production values are they have a sort of a bare minimum of production values that you don't really have in American films, because American films can either be a very lush and lavish and expensive, or they can be bottom of the basement cheap, like the next film I'm going to talk about, and that is one of my this is in my top 10 favorite films, and that's Carnival of Souls. I love this movie so much, and it was made for about $30,000,
Oh, wow.
and it was shot it was released in 1962, and it didn't get a very wide release, and it kind of died just when it was released. Mostly because when it was released, it went right into public domain, which ultimately I think is what rescues the film. And we've talked about this before.
Yes.
By virtue of being public domain and being produced well enough to be passable even today, as a horror film. And I think it's a great horror film, quite honestly. Carnival of Souls is, like I said, just one of my favorites. And it's awesome that it's public domain, and you can get great copies of it from archive.org or wherever it is you like to watch your public domain titles, or YouTube. The thing I like about archive.org is that there are no commercials. And I got to tell you, I mean, YouTube's a great resource, but dang, it's the commercials anymore. I mean, it's a
Two
trial.
expensive commercials as well now.
And I watch, I'm on the treadmill quite a bit, and I watch, YouTube videos and such, and I don't get to see much of the video, as much of the videos as I get to see of the commercials anymore. It's really bad. And there's a lot of political commercials because it's election year, so that makes it even
Mm.
worse. But going back to Carnival of Souls, it's amazing this movie really got made at all. The director, Herc Harvey, worked for Centron Productions in Lawrence, Kansas, and Centron made educational films and documentaries as well. And he cranked a number of these things out. I mean, he was no slouch. So he had a significant experience in you have some theatrics. He actually appears in some of the educational films, especially where there are some acting vignettes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he will occasionally appear in one, no doubt, because they needed an extra person, to be in the scene. He even narrates some of them as well. And if you go to the Carnival of Souls page at the drive-in, you can see a couple of examples from archive.org of Herc Harvey's educational films. They're again very competently shot. He worked at Centron for decades, but this Carnival of Souls was his only theatrical film. He got the idea when he was driving back to Kansas from California coast, because he'd been working, on a educational film or a documentary there. They needed to shoot some footage on the West Coast, and as he was driving back, he had just gotten a divorce from his first wife. He had no kids. And I think he was feeling a little bit lost. And he saw an abandoned amusement park as he was driving through Utah called Salt Air. And it was scheduled for demolition. And it was demolished, obviously after the film was shot. And it gave him the idea to create a feature film, because the setting was just perfect for it. He doesn't use the setting all that much in the film. You get to see it more at the end and in just brief snippets. through throughout the film. But it did spark the interest in the movie, and he got a great character. I'm sorry, a great actress to do it, who only made two films, oddly enough, but she made two cult classic horror films. This was her first one, Carnival of Souls. Her name's Candice Hilligoss. She's still with us. She's about 89 years old. Um, and was fairly active. I don't know, probably 20 years ago, or maybe even more, especially on the HorrorCon circuits. She would appear at some of them, looking very glamorous. Still beautiful too, fabulous look. But I think she does a fantastic job as an actress in this. For Carnival of Souls, the setup for the plot is this. She is in school to learn how to be an organist, and that's going to be her career. She's out hanging around with some of her girlfriends. They get challenged to a race by some guys, and they're run off a bridge and they go into the water. Well, after a search, she just sort of appears, she just walks out of the water about 3 hours after the accident happened. And after that, she's sort of caught in this schism between life and death. She
Mhm.
occasionally becomes a non-person where, people don't see or hear her. So she's practically invisible. There's a lot of metaphors. If you watch this movie and think about it, you could
It
attach a
sounds very
lot.
psychological.
So you could attach a lot of meaning to it, and it might have been just his way of doing a horror film and not having to have a monster costume too. But the fascinating thing about this is that with Candice Hilligoss, I think she does a great job. That would be a tough acting assignment. And I
Mhm.
think she does a really good job at conveying the fact that she doesn't belong either here or there. She's just sort of in the middle. She's her other acting partner in this is Sidney Berger. He plays the creepy guy who lives at the same boarding house that Candice Hilligoss lives at after she gets her job and moves to oh gosh, I can't remember. I think it is Utah, or wherever it is that she moves to. As many times as I've seen this movie, you'd think I would have that part memorized because I've seen this movie a lot. The thing I wanted to talk about with her, uh, she's only in one other film, and that's The Curse of the Living Corpse. It's a Del Tenney movie from 1964. It is Roy Scheider's debut film. Roy Scheider from the Seven Ups and the French Connection, all that jazz. I mean, how many movies did he star in the 70s? Jaws. Oh, gosh, I forgot that. Well, this is his first movie, and it's called Curse of the Living Corpse. It's a Del Tenney film, and it's set, I think, early 20th century or so. It's not really a bad movie, but she has a fairly meaty role in it. She doesn't make it all the way through the movie, unfortunately. So that means she's not the star. Um, but the thing I wanted to talk to her about her is that, starring in these two now cult classic movies, you would think that, in both horror films, you would think that maybe she would have gone on and done something. Unfortunately, she didn't. She married a well-known character actor named Nicholas Coster in 1960. Now he was on soap operas. He did episodic television. He did commercials. Very recognizable face. Very well spoken. He did narrative voiceovers really well. And if you're wondering what he looked at, his name is Nicholas Coster with a C, Coster. Um, Apparently, they had a really contentious divorce because uh, not that long ago, she wrote a book called The Odyssey and the Idiocy: Marriage to an Actor. And it's well, a lot of it is based on her marriage to her first husband with Nicholas Coster. So it's not going to be very complicated. She clearly spent a lot of time loathing this guy. if you read it, uh, I'll paraphrase some of this. And she says that there was once told that there are three kinds of men that you shouldn't marry. working actors, non-working actors, and actors who are between jobs. She says that she hung in with this guy for about 20 years. I think got divorced in 81 or so. She massaged his ego, addressed his every whim, had his children. And then, after all that support, when he did become successful, he started screwing around on her and not paying any attention to the kids. So I guess be careful of what you wish for because you might actually get it. But I haven't read the book. I've only read like snippets from the book, quite honestly. But just based on the pieces I've read, I've got to buy a copy of it. It sounds so funny. And to think that somebody, even after like 25, 30 years, would still have so much loathing for a human being that they go ahead and put it all down in the book.
Is he
I
still
think
with us?
she is. Now, Nicholas Coster passed away last year. He was 90 years old, or about 90. He would have been 90 last year because he was born in 1933. But Carnival of Souls. I mean, I'm sure everybody who's watching this has seen the movie, but if you haven't or haven't watched it for a long time, give it another shot. The frontispiece of the film is not very well done. It's not shot in sync sound. The dubbing is pretty terrible, but it does set up the action for the film. So just get through that. It's not very long. It's just about, I don't know, probably 2 minutes or so. You can overlook that bad piece of it. The rest of the film is actually beautifully made. It's beautifully shot, um, and creepy as all get out. And for $30,000, I think that's remarkable. And it's a shame that he didn't ever do anything else of this. I'm sure it probably came up, but since this one wasn't financially successful for him, and back then, coming up, scraping up $30,000, emptying people's pockets and such, that had to have been hard. It had been really tough to do. And anybody, well, we've talked about this before too, but anybody who has the chutzpah in order to have a vision, find people to pay for it, which that's the real talent. You might have a great story, but getting a backer, that's hard. And then the backers always want to know. They always
Backers
want to say,
wanna
well, I
what?
like this, but not that, so it's not
Yes.
your vision. If you take money from people, it's not your vision.
Well, it could remain your vision, except you might have to compromise your
Yeah,
vision.
but then if you have to compromise, that's not your vision. Unless you have to compromise just with it's something internally, something but if you're having to deal with another person, yeah, it's not your vision much anymore. Sorry. That happens to a lot of independent film producers too. If they ever have a hit, their lives just sort of become miserable because the studio, although the studio loved the movie that they made without their input, all of a sudden, each executive wants to put a fingerprint, on the next one.
Uh-huh.
And I, I mean, if that's what it takes to get it made the way you want to get it made, I certainly understand doing it. I'm not saying
Well,
that that's to
that,
sell
that's
anything like that.
that's true of books and things also. Like right now, I'm involved in an
There is.
anthology for a major publisher, and I've been published by not so major publishers before, and everything was fine. Some minor editing, maybe some suggestions they throw my
Mhm.
way, but that was all it took. The chapter has been written, it's been rewritten, now it's being rewritten again. Uh, so some of the great ideas that started and inspired this book are no longer part of the book. And so
Exactly.
there was a great compromise. The whole project is not under my purview. I just contributed a chapter, but
Mhm.
that chapter is not the chapter that I originally wrote,
Right.
or the motivation for writing it isn't exactly my motivation. Uh, so I can see what you're saying. And with a lot of projects too, even artistic projects, when I had my show, it was quirky, it was on cable. So most of it was, my vision, it remained intact. Plus, I was the executive producer. So I was able to control it. But some of the contracts that other people wanted us to sign, had I signed those contracts, they would own us. we couldn't even do anything with ourselves or even call ourselves what we, what names we had in the production. And they could use us for merchandising in any way that they saw fit. So
Mhm.
I wound up not signing a lot of contracts that might have been lucrative for me, but I didn't want to give up that degree of control of my vision. I'd much rather have my vision and have fun with it than be owned by somebody else.
Well, and this is where, a good attorney is a necessary evil. You, it's so easy to get bogged down into the legalese and contracts. And that's where you really have to have, you have to spend the money, and you find the best attorney you can find and say, hey, what does this mean? What am I agreeing to? And can we agree to strike some of these clauses that we don't go along with? You negotiate. It really gives you a leg up on negotiation.
And
Um,
unfortunately, we're running out of time for today's conversation. And I'm really enjoying, I enjoy all your episodes, but this one I'm especially enjoying because I too have background with carnivals and freak shows, they used to call them back in the day, and a lot of fond and creepy memories of being in such places. So I'm looking forward to continuing with this.
you know,
How
Go ahead.
Now, how can people find you and locate Brian's Drive-In Theater? I started out as a fan of Brian's, over a quarter of a century ago. I found his website, and I was afraid it wouldn't be there next time. So I printed out every single page. And for a long time, I kept a notebook where the entire website was in the notebook. Unfortunately, decades of moving around from state to state and from town to town. I don't know what happened to that notebook, although I may stumble across it one day, but I'm still a fan of Brian. So, how can you gather more fans with your wonderful work?
You can point your browser to briansdriveintheater.com. Whoops, that's this way, Brian, with an I. And if you want to interact with me on social media, yes, I'm old and I'm just down to Facebook right now. Twitter, I haven't even looked at Twitter for, I don't know, months at this point. Twitter kind of self-destructed, so yeah, I'm still on Facebook right now. Toying with Instagram, maybe, but right now just Facebook. But you can find me at either by running a search for Brian's Drive-In Theater or Brian Walker.
Awesome. I used to be active on LinkedIn, and
I still am.
they sent me a letter saying that my resume and work information was in the top 10% of LinkedIn for that year. I don't remember what year it was.
Wow.
So
Hey. Yeah, I use LinkedIn's actually one of the older social media
yes,
platforms. It's about 21, 22 years old, 2002, 2003, or something
something
like
around there. Yeah, it was in the earlier mid 2000s that I had that honor.
that. Well, since I teach for our university's College of Business and Economics, one of the things what I strive for with my students who are B&E majors is that they have a fully fleshed out LinkedIn profile. Um, and they need to have a start on, connections as well. A good start. They need to have a couple hundred or so, which is tough for an undergraduate.
I used to be in vocational counseling and workforce development, so
Mhm.
my
What I
LinkedIn
do is very similar. I understand.
mythical Greek hero for hire. That's a
I'm just retired professor.
oh, okay. I like that. Anyway, thank you so very much, Brian. I wish we had more time today.
Me too.
Say hi to Greg. Have a wonderful retirement,
Oh, thank
and
you.
I will talk to you very soon.
All righty. Talk to you later.
And thanks to all who viewed this video. Joyous journeys and amazing adventures to you and to all you hold dear.
Good night.
Good night.